It is time to get started. Why don't we open up the word prayer? Holy Father, I thank you that you're patient with us. I thank you for your goodness. I thank you and praise you for Jesus and the forgiveness you provide. Father, help us as we wrestle through your words to understand them. Lord, I pray for wisdom and insight. I pray also for our church as we attempt to sharpen one another. Help us to do this in a spirit that honors you, that allows your spirit to do the work of unification. Father, give us understanding of these passages and help bring honor to your name through us this morning. It's in your Son Jesus I ask these things. Amen. We're going to begin with a question that got posed a few weeks ago. You had homework to do. I'm going to see if you did your homework. If not, we're going to table another week, give you another opportunity to do that homework, since Steve asked the initial question and he's not here. But we had, up here it says that we looked at Numbers 18, which talked particularly about the role of the priesthood. And the question was asked, well, it looks specific to Aaron and his sons are allowed to minister in their male, but it did not seem that there was something specific to the Levitical line that had to be male. And so instead of just answering it, we threw it out there. There are plenty of other scriptures that make this very clear. Have you had a chance to do that research? I will take that as a no. And I'm going to give you another week on it, since Steve's not here. He had the original question. It's a good question. There's plenty of scriptures that support and give very clear answers. I'd like for you to look those up. Take a few moments this week, crack open your Bible, look for the answers of the male and female roles within the priesthood. I think it'd be helpful, and we'll resolve this question hopefully next week. Jeff, you want to pick up the Proverbs 31?
So good morning, everybody. So I think we had pretty much gotten through Proverbs chapter 31. This is the wife of noble character passage. But we maybe didn't address all the questions or all the comments or thoughts that people had, so I wanted to give people a chance to talk about this a little bit more before we close the subject. Chris has very nicely written all the points that were made last week. Let's just open it up kind of in general. Does anybody have any additional thoughts that have come to mind, over the past week after we talked about this? Additional comments or insights about this description?
Or if you can't read my chicken scratch, I can interpret something, but it's your comments from last week, essentially.
Okay. One thing I don't see up there is something I did last week was I didn't actually start in verse 10, which in the NIV is subtitled Epilogue, the Wife of Noble Character. I actually started in verse 1 of 31. Does anybody remember the point that was made there?
The advice was given by an inspired mother.
Yes, yes. That's part of it. And what else? I'll just say it, so at the same time, I guess. The qualities, the general qualities here that a king has, are actually reflected in a more specific way in the wife of noble character. For example, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of those who are destitute. Now, hopefully children in the family are not destitute, but they are people that need protection. They need to be spoken up for. Another thing we mentioned, it is not for kings to drink wine, rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what the law decrees. So temperance, self-control. You know, if this woman is going to accomplish all these things, and she literally is working from morning until apparently fairly late in the evening, she cannot be, you know, off drinking and being lazy and that sort of thing. And speaking up and judging fairly in verse 9. Very important part of being a wife, and especially a mom. Judging fairly. You know, you've got multiple kids. Any of us who've had more than one child, and even with one child, I suppose, have run into this. You know, how do you deal with conflicts? You know, conflicts with their friends, conflicts with each other. What's fair? Very important to be fair. Children, if they perceive any kind of unfairness, you know, oh, he's your favorite, she's your favorite, it's terrible. So anyway, that was the other point we made. So here's a question that I thought of. Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm thinking that she would be a person that people outside of her home trust very well, and she is a businesswoman since her husband is gone. So she has to have a relationship with people outside of her home and having the characteristics that she has, you know, to be able to accomplish all of that. And
It sounds like she is. I mean, for one thing, throughout this passage, it sounds like, you know, the good things she does reflect well on her husband somehow. But also at the very end, it does say, give her the reward she has earned and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. You know, her children do rise and call her blessed. Her husband obviously loves her deeply. But yes, she is recognized within the community as being someone special. Anything else? Do you think this is a happy lady? So how do you get that out of, I agree with you, but how do you get that out of the passage? What do you see in here that would imply that she is satisfied with her life?
So she could lie.
Yeah. Where does it say that?
25.
She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. So what does that imply? What does that mean? You're right. You know, she's obviously not an unhappy person. But what does that mean? She can laugh at the days to come.
She doesn't worry about tomorrow.
No.
And it does says she smiles at the future.
Yeah. She's looking forward to things.
she understands God's grace, I would think. An understanding of the grace of God, and have a sense of satisfaction that you are doing the things that He asked, and therefore He will give you the promises.
Yeah. In fact, again, towards the end it says, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So there are a lot of good things working together here. She has a lot of things going. She has a lot of responsibilities. At the same time, she is grounded in faith. You know, she's not, I don't think she's a workaholic. You know, there are very busy people who are not workaholics. The workaholic thing is I think is an attitude, right? It comes from worrying. Oh, if I don't do this, something bad's going to happen to me. She doesn't think that way. She works hard, but her energy, I guess, comes from her hope. And that's definitely a New Testament thing, right? So, any other thoughts?
I want to have one comment on it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was not here last week, so I only heard through the video, but from a lot of the discussion kind of breaking down these roles, the idea of being a helpmeet, I think is definitely defining the roles that you're the heart of her husband, trust in her, and he will have no lack of gain. It may have been described that way, I'm not sure, but I do think that definitely is something we should
Somebody
look at.
said that, and I don't know if it can, I haven't listened to the tape, I have to admit, but I remember at the very end of the class, that was the question. So how does this relate to the Genesis passage? And somebody, I don't remember who it was, but somebody said, well, this is describing what a helpmeet means. I don't remember who, but somebody said that, I remember that, and I think they're right. think they're exactly right. This is kind of like an expansion. Many, many years later, society has developed, things have kind of gotten more complicated than they were in the garden. But the basic idea of being a helper or a helpmeet for Adam is still there, still very much there. I wanted to read you something that I thought was interesting. Now this is kind of, if you know me, this is kind of personal, me, a little bit. But in the Arlington Advocate, which is our local paper, there was this little article here. Shared workspaces could grow business. This is something I'm interested in personally. So I'll read you a little bit of this. So for Arlington's many work-from-home types, the shoestring budget entrepreneurs, the remote corporate employees, the tiny tech startups, the 9-to-5 can get pretty lonely. It can also be tough to focus, what with all the chores to do and TV to watch right at hand at home. In all, about 6% of Arlingtonians work in their houses, and many of them say they wish they had an office to work in, coworkers to chat with, and most of all, a support system to help them feel less like they're all on their own. That's according to a team of, get this, local women calling themselves the Collective, who have been studying the market conditions in Arlington, Lexington, and Belmont, and say Arlington would be a perfect place for a co-working environment, a relatively new economic development strategy that puts people who work from home under one roof. Now, later on in the article, this is not just related to women. It's the women who initiated this. So how does this relate to this passage? I mean, I see some interesting connections. How does this, why did I read you this in light of Proverbs 31?
She seems to be out and about in the community and not just at home. This
Yes.
stuff takes care of her home.
Right. And yet she's, so this is, Proverbs 31 describes someone who a lot of their production and their work occurs at home. It's interesting that these just happen to be a group of women who are concerned about people who do things at home. I just thought that was kind of interesting. They mentioned the support system to help them feel less like they're all on their own.
I think the virtual woman has the support system right there in her home, and what they're saying is that plus with society, the world, whatever, so many things, you're not gonna have that kind of support system. So really, in essence, they are looking for what she has.
I think you're right. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too, is that in Proverbs 31, she does, I mean, her primary place of activity appears to be her home. Now, she has a field, we talked about that, whether the household servants work in the field, I don't know. The field doesn't have to be next door to her house. But it's mostly a home-centered thing. And yet you don't get the impression that she's lonely, because it talks about her works bringing her praise to the city gate. So in today's communities, things are not as connected they were in the communities of the time. I think is a sad thing. We talk about reaching out to the lost and things. I think it's harder to do that in a culture that is, everybody's in front of the TV at 5 o'clock, they go inside their house and never come out. When this was written, that wasn't true. And I think you're exactly right. I don't think the woman in Proverbs 31 experienced the loneliness that's expressed here. But it's interesting that it was women who took this initiative, with this home-centered kind of thing. I just thought that was very interesting. Contrary to a lot of the modern stereotypes, where people think they want to go in our society. That's all.
When you said, Jeff, that she wants to open the door, she's saying that she wants to be involved with all the other people, and she's not just dwelling on herself, and she wants those ladies to share what she's going through. It shows you that she doesn't just think of herself, which is a very good, thing to be done.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, in both the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament, community is a big thing, right? We're not designed to be alone. Women aren't designed to be alone either. And when we are alone all the time, it's just not the way we're made. Yeah.
I think that one of the things here too is this is a godly woman. and those are probably not.
We don't know, yeah,
You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
her view is definitely not gonna be the same. And what they're looking for, really, what they're looking for is, they need Christ in their life, you know what I'm saying? So it's
They
gonna be a
need
big-
Christ and
Yeah,
other people
right,
too.
And, right, so that would
Yeah.
bring the other people, if you really understand the attributes of what Christ offers.
Right,
So it's kind of a,
yeah, yeah. So, anything else before we go on to our next section, which I'll let Chris introduce? Doesn't mean we can never talk about this again, by the way. It's just, you know, we'll move on officially to a different chapter.
But we are continuing with something in a very similar vein, so I think it still lends itself, so if you have some more insights, by all means, bring them in. And one of the things that, based on what Jeff had talked about, the verses 1 through 9 being kind of, here's your instructions to be a king, and then the kind of that's reflected in the wife. I can't help but think of Peter, I guess 2:9 or so, 2 something where, and we're going to get to this passage eventually, but where God says to the husbands, listen to your wives, or your prayers should be in. And, excuse me, the reason I think of that is, I see this role of helpmeet shining here, in that the mom says to the son, here's these key things you need to be a good leader. And, excuse me, but if you, now, this is a challenging, calling for him, but then they move on and says, now here's what a good wife is. She's already doing a lot of these things, and as a team, your awareness increases. And I look at, granted, there's stereotypes for, well, men are this way and women are this way. Some of them are often true, but every particular couple is unique. But one thing that you find is, if I've been there with my wife before, where we'll watch the same situation unfold, and I'll come away with 10 facts that I would say describe the situation. My wife comes up with a completely different 10 facts, and it's wonderful how those complement each other. And if I'm listening to my wife, I have a better ability to make a good judgment in that case. And so I think we don't know, particularly the wife, the mother's talking to her son. She knows him. She's giving specific instructions. Granted, they're general enough that God says, this is good for all of you, and brought them into the scriptures. But I do see some of that help me to side of that it is your team working together, where husbands listen to the inputs of their wives, and it enables you to do your role better. And I think likewise it's also true that women also find a very similar role with their husbands, and the discussions there help them to be better wives and mothers and women. So I don't know if you agree, or seems like that to me. Hopefully I won't hack to death here, but, all right, the next particular portion, this is on the handout in the back. Let me just move this over. You can stay up here if you want. Kind of tag team here. All right, I gave you one. I put it up there, you just put it over there.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I put on the top a passage out of Hebrews 11. I thought it was kind of an interesting, at least, backdrop for our discussion. Someone like to read that passage for me? Hebrews 11:31 through 38a. It's in the top of the handout. Sure, Becca. Go ahead.
By the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them.
Reason I thought this was a good backdrop for our discussion, this is kind of the, often called the Heroes of Faith chapter, where it goes through many of the key pivotal people that God used throughout history to shape and show us what faith is in the midst of their society. Women are included in this. Rahab, I kind of began with her as I just backed it up a verse. But then you see these key pivotal people and how they shape society and how God is using them. And as today we're going to kind of break from our syllabus a little bit. Jeff had a great idea. Says since we've just finished up Proverbs 31, let's jump right into different women in the Old Testament that stand out. Now, some of these are going to be wonderful examples. Some of these are going to be really bad examples. Both are okay. I think they're worth discussing. So this handout's kind of a framework for that, and we're going to begin. We want you to come up with a woman you know in the Old Testament that you think stands out, and we're going to kind of go through some of these key questions about how to look at why God placed her in the Scriptures, why He recorded her role, and see if we can flesh it out and understand it better. So I'm opening up the floor to you. Pick a woman. Raise your hand. I'll pick on you, and we'll go from there. Actually, call out, because I'm going to be erasing this while we're talking, so I have a place to write them up.
Mine is Pharaoh's daughter.
Pharaoh's daughter.
Yes, I can't think of what her name was, but Pharaoh's daughter who took Moses in and raised him as her own. He learned the ways of the Egyptians, but still she let him be raised with his mother.
Sexist
He knew his
woman.
own people. And when the time come when she was in front of the new Pharaoh and Moses was grown and standing there, and she stood up, and under all pains and penalties, she stood up and said, yes, he was a prince. I did raise him. I did find him. When the time came, she stood up. She came out with all this. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was standing by the son that she took in and that she loved.
Okay, let's it's actually chapter 2. Let's look at this particularly in through the Scriptures. Now, one thing that with a story like this and others similar, we have lots of Hollywood reproductions of these, and with that bring in lots of interesting details, interesting interpretations. And so in that process, we got to delineate what God actually says versus what might be a reasonable interpretation. So let's go back to the Scripture, read what it says about it, and see what we can glean from that. So Exodus chapter 2, let's see, this, I guess it's beginning in verse 5 is where Pharaoh steps in and goes through verses 10. So if someone would like to read chapter 2, verses 5 through 10.
Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered, and the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water.
Okay. So I believe this is the only passage in all Scriptures that talk about Pharaoh's daughter. The later passage when Moses comes back, it says that a new Pharaoh is in charge and did not remember it. And so this is kind of our block. So from here, what can we learn of this particular example? Is she a godly character? Is she setting a good example? Is she, what can we glean from her example?
She was compassionate.
She was compassionate, absolutely. So, let's see, she's compassionate.
Does she fear God? We don't know. We don't know. It's a question mark. Culturally, she would not have, because, well, she would have feared lots of gods, but not the only real God. So we don't really know of her religious background. We're not told. So fear of God is a question mark, and one that we can't answer.
She's a humble woman,
Humble? Why do you say that?
because she would not have even take the time to listen to the young girl who asked her, do you want me to go and get somebody to go see about this child? Nor would she have dealt with Moses' mother, you know, the way she did. So she had to have some sense of humility in order to even, you know, go that far without being, you know, ordered, you know, overpowering.
Sure. I think that very likely, yeah. What do you?
I don't know how it is important, but she was used by God. For some reason, God sought her out to use her for his plan. Maybe because she had some attributes that were pleasing to him. And also, she was the one who brought him up, so she had influence on his upbringing. Maybe also God saw that there was, we don't know that's interpretation, but
Sure.
maybe, for some reason God chose her. And she had power. She had power to make her own decisions and to decide things like that.
Right,
I want
she-
this is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, she had the power to choose this as Pharaoh's daughter. She had a decent amount of freedom, probably well above most other people in the society. Yes, sir.
She took a risk similar to the kind of risk that Esther took, because at this time, the Egyptian authorities were very afraid of the Hebrews because they were multiplying. And their intent was to get rid of, boy children. And she went against that, actually, which was a risk.
Right. She chose to use her power, whatever limit that was, to do something compassionate, even though it would directly violate the command of her father. Now, whether it was a slap in the face or simply, oh, sure, that's fine, it's just one, we don't really know. But there could have been all kinds of politics going on there, hard to know. Rebecca?
Kind of a side note, there's like suspicions that she might have been going down to do like a ritual that was supposed to help her be able to have children, so that she may have found him and thought him as a blessing.
Interesting theory. Don't know. We don't know if it's true, but it's
Yeah,
very
there's
interesting.
suspicion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
having the power, that would make her, I would think that more so she was a strong woman and had courage.
She definitely had courage. Yeah.
Characteristics would be courage and strength.
Compassion at great risk, which equals courage. And as you know, Pharaoh's daughter, she's not called out as Lois or Rebecca or whatever. She's called out as Pharaoh's daughter. Her power is because of her connection with power. And yet, a daughter has a sway over her father. And so she chose to use that doorway into power to accomplish something that most people, most Egyptians, at least the way we understand the way they were treating them, would not have taken. So that stands out, makes her shine a little bit as far as a little touch of godly character in the midst of what is essentially a pagan nation. Yes?
She, I take this, she had a different view of the Israelites than most of the Egyptians had, because she's giving them who she wants to be her son, to suckle, to eat their food, to live with them, which a lot of the Egyptians they saw the Israelites as not much more than animals. And I don't think that there would have been other people at that time, Egyptians, that would have taken their child and let a Hebrew.
Yes.
Again, you could speculate that, we're saying these things are her characteristics, but we could say that God played a role in that to touch her heart and cause her to be some of these characters within the plan.
Absolutely, and we have, a few chapters away when we get to the plagues, we see this very thing happening with Pharaoh, where Pharaoh initially, he's stubborn, he's pursuing a particular will, but after his feelings and who he was is clear, and he's made his decision, God then controls him and brings something completely different than probably what would have happened, because you see from scriptures, Pharaoh would have probably backed down after, I think, plague number 5, somewhere in that range, he would have stopped. But after that point, it says God continued to harden his heart to bring about the victory and the looting of Egypt that God intended. And it says in the New Testament that God brought Pharaoh up for that very purpose, knowing that he would take that pathway. And so I think it's very reasonable to think that of many, but I would give her the benefit of the doubt to say, this is her start. She's a compassionate person. And she listened to God when God was giving her those gentle reminders of what I think all of us receive, to do what is right, to fear God even amidst a pagan culture without instruction. And then whether he overrode and pushed her further or not, I don't know.
I think she was a woman without a child, too,
Possibly. We don't really know that, though,
No.
actually. Do we? Actually, we were talking the possibilities. Does it actually say that here?
Scripture does not, well, that's true, scripture doesn't say whether she was a married woman with children or anything. I just, sounded like she was.
Yeah, we can make some cultural arguments that might make but I think we have so limited information. It's kind of hard to say. Yeah, Tatiana.
We can see that it's God's plan because the mother sent the baby down the river, but she sent his sister. And it's the sister who says, I'm going to go get a Hebrew woman. And it's not coincidence that she picks his mom. It was all the plan, God's plan. So she had those attributes, but God definitely made everything happen the way that it happened.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah. God's hand is clearly in this. Okay, let's. Example 1. Yes.
Passage Miriam.
Miriam, sure. Why not? Miriam goes on for quite a ways, from Exodus, basically all of Exodus, part of Numbers. I don't think she's really much in Leviticus that I know of. I could be wrong, you can correct me. So let's look at Miriam. We just read this passage. Let's read a little more around it so that we can get her particular role. Let's go back to verses 1 and read 1 through 4, and then we will read 11 through 14. Who'd like to read those surrounding passages? Okay, I'll do it. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at the distance to find out what would happen to him. Skipping down to verse 11. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went to his brethren and looked on their hard labors. Actually, there's nothing about her in here. And it's just a continuation of the story. All right. I think the next time we see her is actually when they are crossing the Red Sea. Could be wrong. Let's see.
1520, what you're saying here.
So what's that?
1520, is that
All right, let's. Probably a good idea as a background there, and yeah. So let's start at 15. This is a key story for Miriam, and there's one other later in Numbers which I think we should cover. So if you can find that passage in Numbers where she's relating to Moses.
26:59.
Okay, 26:59. All right, so we'll go there next. So in chapter 15, they've just crossed over and been the Red Sea. They've been saved miraculously by God. And Moses sings out this song. And then verse 19. For the horses of Pharaoh and with his chariots and his horsemen went into the sea, and the Lord brought back the waters of the sea on them. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea. And Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, with all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dancing. And Miriam answered them, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and his rider he has hurled into the sea. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. So, another passage. Why don't we? This one's got more information. Let's talk about this, and then we'll jump to the next one. So let me add that up here. Exodus 15, 19 through 21. Okay. So what do we learn about Miriam's character here? About her, is she fulfilling God's design for her? Or is she doing something different from God's design? What's your opinion on that? Or what context can you do? Andrew?
Well, it says here she's a prophetess. It says Miriam the prophetess, the brother of Aaron. Or
Mhm.
something like that.
So she is called prophetess here. Is she fulfilling God's, is that your call of saying, hey, she's fulfilling God's design?
Well, it depends on what they mean by prophetess, I guess. What kind of prophetess she was.
Okay. What's your thoughts? What can we figure out from context here? What are the words she's saying? Becca.
Thank you, Lord. And actually, she's saying the whole song before it, too.
I think
That was
that was Moses, right?
Song of Moses and Miriam.
Then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord. Not specific to Miriam necessarily, though, but yes, everyone sang. And then Miriam answered them and said, Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, the horse and his rider, and he has hurled him into the sea. What is she proclaiming in her words? The power of the Lord. So she is praising God in her statement. So is that good?
Yeah.
Her words are good. So we can at least say that about it. So, prophetess, words are praise. Is she fulfilling God's will here? Design, her role. Yeah.
I have the same question as Andrew. What does prophetess mean? Is it the same as the other prophet?
Leading role in some way by having God's words on her lips and coming out.
So
Or leading, I mean leading, not leadership, but a role in the community to
She
praise
had-
God, to
yeah.
voice that praise in front of the community.
She was a channel of God,
Yeah.
as with many others, but she was willing to live with the goading of God to do what was his calling. So is that kind of,
Yeah.
all right. So, words of praise, willing to do God's bidding. I'll say that. Because her efforts, when she spoke up, was trying to praise God, trying to give credit where credit was due. She didn't look at that and say, wow, I've never seen hurricane winds like that before. Wow, that's awesome. I can't believe we got saved like this. I wonder what happened. She doesn't. She says, God just did this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe what I also want to express is God uses men to express his words, his wisdom. He uses women too to fill them up with his spirit and to let them voice his praise. Or to let the women, or she was used by God to voice his praise and prophecy and the spirit.
So maybe we'll say the alternate. That
Talk through her.
we don't see God limiting his spirit and his guidance to men only
Yeah.
anywhere in scriptures. We see God working in his people. They do have different roles, which is what we're getting at. But absolutely, God is not limiting his spirit. No.
Well, it's like in the New Testament. I think it's quoted in the Old Testament, out of the mouths of babes and infants, God has ordained praise. I mean, she, like hopefully everyone in that assembly, recognized that God had done something amazing, and they just voiced that, giving the Lord the credit rather than taking it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to take a little liberty here. I'm going to say lowercase s. I'm not going to, the reason I'm saying this is that what we're describing is the Spirit of God, his character, his direction, who he is, being seen. That's what we're describing. We're not saying that God put the Holy Spirit on her in a way that was miraculous, like we do see itemized out in other passages. The only reason I say this is because we don't see that here. She didn't say that the Spirit came upon her and she shouted out this from the Spirit. We don't say that. But what we say is, we see her character, we see what she's saying, and it is consistent with the Spirit of God. So that's why I just want to, I don't want to say more than what this says, and we'll keep looking at other examples.
It's not like Mary and Elizabeth.
Right, exactly. Like when Mary and Elizabeth, you hear the Spirit came upon her and sang out. I mean, so that was a very clear God speaking through her. Now, maybe it's the same, but that's a longer argument, which I'm not sure I'm going to have here. Yeah.
Well, I think from a child, we could see that Miriam had boldness,
Mm-hmm.
and she was maybe a little forward. And
Sure.
I think you could see that her character, even from a child, was, she was bold.
We certainly see that in the Numbers passage, which we're going to get to next.
Yeah. Maybe sometimes as we continue, she was a little forward. Sometimes she, kind of went a little more.
She was willing to go up to the daughter of the Pharaoh and being a slave and an unhappy, unwelcome people. Yeah, I mean, it takes a bold force willing to talk to Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, so that gives a little bit of her character. Let's keep moving. Let's go to the Numbers passage, and then we're out of time. Oh, these classes are way too short. Next week, we pick up with Numbers chapter 12. Let me just write that up here. That's where we're heading next. We're going to go to Numbers 12. We'll finish up with Miriam, and over the week, be thinking of more examples. I would say that it took us most of class, about half a class, to do 1.5. They were shorter, so we probably want to do the next 2 weeks and just pick various women. Probably, or at least roughly, we can adjust that, make it longer, shorter.
Yeah. There's probably a few we really should cover.
Right.
These classes that don't come up.
I do agree. All right, so then we're going to tentatively plan for the next 2 weeks to continue down this. So bring your examples of women that you think have something important to say that God is using for a particular role, whether good or bad. Bring them next 2 weeks, and we'll try to go through them. And we can extend those if we need to, or we can shorten if we need to. But I think 2 weeks is probably a good starting place. Would you like to close some prayer, Joe? Sure. All right.
Father, thank you for the many gifts that you put in our path. The beautiful weather, your word, all the many, many things that you've done throughout history, which we see in your word, and we know that there are many, many other things you've done that are not written down because there wasn't enough room to write them all. And we thank you for this class this morning. Pray that you would continue to give us insight into your plan, your thoughts on men and women, and what your intentions are for us as a people. In Jesus' name, amen.